is next for our viewing docket. And this was actually not in our textbook when I took this class in college. It's like a new edition. And when I first saw this appearance, I was a little put out. And the reason I was put out, because if you look at the authors of our textbook so far, we have people like Plato, Kant, Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, and then out of nowhere comes Carol Gilligan. And I thought, oh my, feminism has arrived in the sacred halls of philosophy. And here it is, and I figured they were just throwing her a spot because she was a woman and all that. But I have to confess, once I read her article and what she presented, I felt not only did she have every right to be in the book, but we needed her in the book for some sort of balance with some of these other theories. And basically, what Carol Gilligan was doing in her graduate work was she was looking at theories of right and ethics, and there were a lot of studies being done at the time where college-age males continuously and consistently kept scoring higher on ethics tests than women. And she thought that was really curious because she certainly didn't think college-age males were any more ethical. If anything, they were probably less ethical than college-age females. And so she kept pondering, like, why do we keep getting these results? And her study and research led her to the conclusion it was because of who was making the test and the kinds of ethical questions they were asking, which I think is really interesting when you sort of think of that. What gender do you think were making the ethic test? Males, correct. And it was coming from a male perspective. And if you notice in our book, who have all the ethical theories been written by so far? Males, men. And Carol, she isn't trying to put down men. She's not trying to say women are better than men. She's just saying they're different. Women are different than men. And because we're different, we look at the world different ways, and we even have different values. And so the ethics of care is an attempt to kind of bring a feminizing touch to the rigid, masculine world of ethics. You see our little chart up here. I mean, it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but not entirely. We have the female brain, the male brain, and believe it or not, men and women do think differently. And you can ask yourself, well, is that cultural or is it biological? And the first thing I want to be clear on, in case you're not aware of this, sex is inherited, or sex is genetic. In other words, whether you're a male or a female is determined by chromosomes and secondary sexual characteristics. Okay, it's something you're born with. You're born male or female. In some cases, maybe there might be a little of both, but we're not even going to try to get into that kind of specialization for today's discussion. Maybe you can do a big paper on that if you'd like, to talk about middle sex ethical contributions or something like that. But anyways, gender, at least until I think 3 years ago, was learned behavior. I believe 3 years ago, California passed a law that said gender is also biological. So I'm not quite sure how we're going to deal with that. Gender in the traditional sense is when we talk about masculine and feminine. But what is masculine and feminine is culturally determined. Your culture tells you what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, how to act like a man, how to act like a woman. Your genes, chromosomes, tell you biologically whether you're male or female. Okay, so do you have that distinction? And once again, I'm not quite sure how the state of California can pass a law saying gender is biological, because in California we don't just have 2 genders, we have 9, last time I checked. Yes, it is true. We have 9 legally recognized genders in California. As far as what are they? Okay, I'll try. Okay, we got masculine and feminine. We have gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, let's see, we have hermaphrodites, asexual, and my personal favorite, non-sexual. There's 9.
What are the 2 bottom ones?
I'm not sure if asexual simply is what all of you in here should be at the moment. Not participating in sexual activity, unless you're married. I don't think it's like worms, where you're like both. I think it's talking about you haven't decided yet if you're masculine, feminine, gay, lesbian, bisexual. Well, you probably know if you're hermaphrodite. Asexual is that non-sexual is simply you don't believe in it and you don't want to be labeled or categorized by gender.
So gender isn't like necessarily biological, but it's also like sexual preference.
It's a way of relating to the world. As like a lesbian woman, or a masculine man, or a feminine woman. Or does that make sense? Although you could have feminine men, but we would call them effeminate. You could have masculine women, but we would call them butch. Well, I know we would call them butch, but some people might call them butch. Put it that way. Or worse. Okay, so I can't deal with California right now, even though I love California and I'm glad we have room for everybody. But if we could just, for the sake of this discussion, stick with masculine and feminine. And we're going to stick kind of like with our culture. We could even maybe do our subculture here. That might even be easier. And what I want us to look at is we're going to look at virtues, masculine and feminine virtues. And so, this is what our culture says it means to be a man in our society or a woman in our society. Values or traits that we would hold. Now, we could do this nicely or it could get nasty, so you guys can set your own rules. I'm just going to be the moderator, and I'm going to write your answers down underneath. To prime the pump, I'm going to give you Carol Gilligan's. She's saying what we need is care. Because right now, the ethical theories are kind of more concerned about right conduct. And she's saying, well, yeah, right conduct is important, but it's also important to care about people. Let me give you an example of how this may look before we go into this list. You might have a man and woman looking at a situation. Maybe their son turns out to be a cannibal.